So we're in the second session today. I hope you've all had a chance to see the case or read the case and reflect upon the questions that you'll be discussing in the breakout rooms. Dipti will be sharing the breakout rooms breakups, like what group are you in shortly. But before we get into it and before actually I hand it over to Achal, just a couple of things that we need for us to think about, right? Like we were discussing about last week's session of Monday's session. And one of the things we spoke about was the fact that a framework of this sort requires a lot of thinking, a lot of unlearning. So do use the community here to be able to think through. I think some of you right now mentioned, how you are not able to really correlate entirely to your practices, but that's what the group is for. That's what your peers are for, to help you think through and reflect upon what you're wondering about. But it'll be great if you can do that on Dara. The breakout room will allow you to do that as well. During the session after the breakout room, your interaction will be mainly with the facilitator, which is Achal.
You pointed out very well that, the peer group is a great group to sort of brainstorm or think through a little bit more about this framework, which, as I evoked earlier, is a difficult one to grasp. The best way to do it is to challenge the model, challenge it. But a better way to do it, while you are challenging the model, also challenge what you already know. And that will make room for whatever mind you ultimately make up. What we hope at the end is all of you to have, put together a PPT, a short one, and the presentation you will make will not be more than 10 minutes at the end, whoever is assembling the discussion. So I hope you enjoyed that discussion. It's a very relevant case. And I'm very, very excited, curious to hear what the group thinks. Okay, so is there any one group that is really excited, ready to make a presentation?
So this was the team. Different voices in the team came up with different ideas. What does the Stats Corp need? A new business model. The first point that came up, I'll read it out. Because government funding shrunk, a new revenue model was required. The financial situation means different platforms allow different streams of revenue. I think that should have been separately. But the Met also pushed them to think of a new business model because they had already entered the world of streaming and they had a success story to look at. The business also needs to move where the consumers go. The democratization of access, which is to reach out to an audience beyond opera lovers, was one point that we also noticed. Okay, the first risk we pointed out was they might not succeed. The second was maintaining the integrity of the art form and not redefining the art form in the process of determining the future course. The technology will have to be up to the mark, so to do justice to the art form. The digital recording means it has to be effective for the live audience as well. Not offending purists and alienating them from the art form. Free access may devalue the art form. When a niche art becomes widely available, it may lose out on the original people who love it. The fear of losing an in-person audience, and the last point, the possibility of affecting the quality of the performance, which is, I think we're sadly repeating ourselves there. But what options exist? There were a series here. Surbhi, Aishwarya, would you guys want to go through this? I don't know if you guys can read it though.
What options do they have? What criteria would you apply? So what we were looking at is essentially was that, actually they would have to go with both, like to keep it real time and also like digitize. So to look for a manager and partnerships beyond public funding, in the sense that they were not looking for directors, but actually people who understood what the opera was in terms of partners also to collaborate with. Looking for collaborators who can double up as connoisseurs to enter the digital space, collaborate with the tourism board, the education board, and those different boards, so when the tourists come, they can be taken. Sure. And even the education board, the college and school kids can be taken for like education purposes, whether it is the architecture, whether it is the costumes, whether it is just the culture of the opera itself. And because the culture of opera has is an integral part of that society in terms of politics also, and in many other ways, and it has been of the national pride. So one was to go digital and real time in terms of collaborations, in terms of finding a partner, in terms of doing workshops and audience building, both online and offline, and also creating a different category of musicians and you know like performers who can take the legacy forward, and the audience who can appreciate it.
Just to add to what you're into the options of what to do, we also talked about approaching education boards to document the work and acclimate younger students to bring audiences, to bring newer and younger audiences to opera, approaching international collaborations in costume, set design, scenography. We also talked about a combination of stagione and repertory models to be able to do this effectively and sustainably over time. And
also to collaborate with the other their peers like Met or other opera houses, because they operate, and so one person, if one artist is in Paris and the other time they are there, so that way if they collaborate with other opera houses, that could be also very good. And then we also spoke of the different models of revenue, like in terms of why both the things will have to be worked out, is because the real-time experience is different, everybody doing the same thing at the same time. And for the niche audience who would want to pay that kind of money for that experience, but for the other people who can't, or who are just getting acquainted with it, they have to kind of start maybe they can or who don't have the time to go to the opera house, they can start digitally acquainting sensitizing themselves or just finding out about it. And then different subscription models. So when you go on to the different digital platforms, you can have different subscription models, and that gives you a steady flow, a recurring flow of income, vis-a-vis just when the opera is staged, you have people coming and then that's it. But if you have if you go online, if you go digital in different ways, then you can have different subscription model in different ways, in terms of how you market the thing. Continued technological innovation and 3D holograms, meaning like the other technology, the kind of newer technologies that are coming in, it's a possibility to use those as well to create some kind of difference or advancement in that. International collaboration with opera organizations, which I mentioned. Approach international collaborators in costume set design, that also was mentioned. Tie up with OTT and streaming platforms. Yeah, right.
And we are aware that it's mentioned that cable channels are already a competition, and Neeti did mention 3D holograms as a possibility, but we know that these are costs involved. But these are ways of looking forward, I think. Was there anyone else who...
That is collaboration rather than it being just a cost,
Mm-hmm.
So just yeah.
And we really think that digital would work because it already has a population that is used to tech, and they are known for being advanced in tech.
Right. And Kumam, I'm just going to put the name here so you can see all the suspects behind this. We know who to blame. Kumam also mentioned the experience, comparing it to going to the cinema and still battling with the fact that you want to go see a movie in IMAX, but that you have to make do under current circumstances. Kumam, if you wanted to mention that, I think that was one point.
So, this whole debate around, opera and the digitization of it kind of brings me to the larger issues, not issues per se, but yeah, the larger questions around, how do we really experience an art form? Are we now more comfortable, streaming, Netflix or Amazon Prime, irrespective of the content, right? It could be a film, it could be music, it could be anything. Yeah. So is it online streaming finally taking over everything else, or are we going to still, find ways to sustain, let's say more traditional, methods of, experiencing art form? So I don't really have an answer there, but I think this is something that I want to think through further which is, the whole opera debate is kind of interesting vis-a-vis the whole debate around, like multiplex and, like big screen versus digital. So it's something I want to think about, not really like, have an answer already.
And also, I think going digital will also bring a sort of freshness, which was lacking, in terms of costumes and the sets. So that freshness will come if you have sessions where you're actually just recording. You have just recording sessions separately and like staging sessions separately. I think that would work best rather than having the recording session while the opera is being staged for the larger audience, because it can be disturbing. And I think all of this would like bring a sort of renewed interest, renewed freshness, and I think all of that to the model.
Okay, so let's just rewind back. Can you put the slides back up, please, Varun? Let's just focus. May I just invite? We'll discuss this the broader picture later. But in order to appreciate and to really, take home the learnings from this case, it would be most useful if we keep our context to 2012 and the Staatsoper in the shoes of Mr. Meyer. So, while it is very attractive to then, extrapolate and always refer back to what is happening today in your own context, it's best if we stay in this context in 2012. The decision that Mr. Meyer has to make is sitting at that point in time with the information he has available that has been shared with you, assuming that he has just that available. So you've got to put yourself in the shoes of Dominic Meyer. So the first question is, and I think which they're talking about, is that the government funding is under pressure. And there is a new need. There is a need for a new model. So keeping that in mind, whenever we are determining eventually the model choices, and we'll see this in the future discussion, it must definitely add to this objective.
Yes, that was a lovely presentation. Just to add to it, a couple of things that our group had discussed was, because digital, and this was actually in response to the last answer as to how could we go about it. And because digital opens up so many possibilities, we talked of how, apart from creation, like there were different strategies. One was pedagogy partners. So partners that could only help increase awareness about opera. And also then OTT platforms and like Netflix, but also to see the possibility of changing the form to not just live streaming, but something more interactive. And an example that comes into mind is Black Mirror's Bandersnatch episode, where the audience could choose which way they wanted the narrative to go. And also in that, to add subtitles and sign language interpreters on the digital platforms, so that a new audience with sign language, a new audience that earlier did not have access to opera could also have access to opera. So not just accessibility, but also inclusion within the digital space. And we also discussed a lot about how streaming versus experience creation online could be explored for move forward. Those were the additions that I thought.
Thank you very much. I think it's a very, very good point. And I must compliment the group and I suppose the larger group as well for having articulated this very well. I mean, there is, an opportunity and there is a need. And the opportunity is also not just democratization of access, but to creating new experiences, delivering on new experiences. And if we relate it back in the previous session, who could we then reach out to? Of that group, of that consumer group, of that orbit that appreciates or needs the experiences to enhance the value of the product or the service or the performance. is the Amethyst. And we will see as we go along. But for now, I think this aspect of why new model, yes, there are opportunities and there are compulsions. But first of all, the most important reason for the model to be even thought about, I mean, as you've seen, Dominic Meyer is technologically very savvy. If you see his background, he understands. Of course, it doesn't mean he's an expert, but he's knowledgeable. In fact, he started and ran the first CD factory in Europe. Now that says a lot, that he's always ahead or in time for the technological curve. He must be aware of the possibilities earlier, but he did not consider a new model at this point in time, until this point in time. So he does feel that there are possibilities, that technological possibilities exist now in order to deliver on a new model. Before even we go into the options, what risks they must hedge themselves against?
So one of the risks outlined was that we could offend the purists of the art form by going into a different area. So you may lose the audience you have by seeking a new one. And you may lose the people who come in person. So the venue may become redundant. These are some of the possible risks that we noticed.
And also the reputation.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think let's classify them. Let's classify the risks into two main parts. Number one, reputational, and number two, financial. So reputational risks, yes, they might not succeed. Now, what does that mean? Does it have an impact on reputation or finance?
Yeah, so responding to Aanchal, actually, the word, when we talk of reputation, it is not simply about, being the StatStop, but it's also being a place of a unique experience. So you end up going to Vienna just to be at the StatStop. So to lose on that, to become one of the many, is something that might not be something which they look forward to, or secondly, might end up diluting the very idea of being the StatStopper. So for me, I think that is one of the risks that they take. Thank you.
So one of the biggest risks you are saying is that by going digital, I mean, the StatStopper is not going anywhere, but just the fact that you are digitally available is diluting the whole institution of StatStopper.
Hi, Aanchal. I basically classified two broad risks. One is infrastructural and one is, around reputation. So for me, the reputation is primarily around, Dominic Meyer's interest of integrating repertory with stagione, the seasonal style of work. And that may at some point create disillusionment amongst the artists on payroll. And with disillusionment, there may be some challenge in artistic creativity. So the negotiation will have to be brought in very well in their contracts and their retention. That's one. Infrastructurally, I had two broad points. I was thinking of 2012. One is obviously the lack of recruiting correct arts administrators with transferable skills between culture and tech can slow down the progress of infrastructure upgradation, and at that point of time, investment in tech was expensive. So you had to really, really whittle down as to who your providers are and who the partners would be and how do you really take it forward. So that's me.
So what you've articulated are the financial risks. That is a publicly funded institution. As you can see from the profit and loss and whatever information is available, funds are in fact shrinking. They have a request, they have a mandate to be more and more financially independent. At this stage, how much money would they have available to spend on technology and technology infrastructure is a big question mark. So Start Super certainly cannot take any risk, any financial risk at this stage. They're in no position to take that, right? So that's a very, very important one. Having said that, let's just stay with the reputational risk. I would still come back to what Atrey was mentioning, that listen, we have Start Super, which is a national symbol, which is, got a certain halo around it. And suddenly if there is a live streaming available, it may completely lose its position in the minds of the visitors to Vienna. Is that a well-founded fear, or do you think it's not likely to be a problem?
So I'm sure the fear is well-founded from a business's point of view, but I don't think there's any. I think that can be easily fixed. However, what I did want to point in the same reputation scenario is the fact that we're seeing this as an opportunity to to kind of facilitate democratization of access, which is what you were discussing earlier. And on the other hand, if we say that, maintaining the entire exclusivity of only people who can go there, or I mean, that way we're just like cutting it off from the third world completely, right? Because only people who can afford to go to Vienna and buy that ticket and enter, and then have access. So I think this is more of the opportunity thing that we were discussing before, that Aanchal had pointed out, and also the newer experiences that can be created. So I mean, even in this question, when I read the second point, which says maintaining the integrity of the art form and not redefining it, I feel like there is the opportunity is to redefine it while definitely maintaining the integrity. But I don't think redefining is something that should be looked down upon or looked away from. And I mean, the integrity can still be maintained, or maybe something completely new comes out of it. But who would
right? I think that's a fair point. What I would like to say here is that the experience of visiting Vienna, walking into the Start Super, all dressed up, and at experiencing that moment is never going to be replaced by what digitally can be offered. So I'm, and also, please remember that Start Super is 98% occupancy. It's hard to, it's already locked up in a way. Yes, you can buy a ticket in advance, but the opportunity to go digital is very unlikely to step on the toes of the reputation of the Start Super institution itself. However, there are reputational risks. And I think the group has captured them quite well. Yes, would the integrity of the art form be maintained in live streaming? Would the purists be offended? Now, what are those? So which means that any criteria in choosing the option that the Start Super will go with eventually must fulfill this. At the same time, let me ask you this question. Do they have an option of not doing anything at all? That's an option. In which case, there is no reputational risk. There is no financial risk. What about that?
Yeah, so you are saying that, there would be no financial risk if they chose to stay as they are. But I think that there would be a financial risk in the long term, because they're already, they're already hard pressed for finances. So if not now, in the long term, it is definitely a financial risk. Plus, owing to Mayor's experience and reputation, he has been put there because of his experience, and his term is going to come to an end. And he also wants to do something like take that leap. And also the example of Met is there. So that is also one major consideration, that they're not the first ones to take a leap into that, into that area. So that works as a success story is there for them to, so they are thinking which way to go, and they know that if not now, tomorrow there will be the financial problems. So they have to do something. They can't be just sitting. That's for sure.
That's right. So here is where StartSoper is boxed in. They have to do something, because they don't have an option of just sitting quiet and not take and assume there is no financial risk. There is, because the public funding is shrinking, and that's a mandate to be financially independent. So that's one reason why they have to do. On the other hand, there is a reputation risk if they choose not to do anything, because Vienna and StartSoper is considered to be a leader, one of the leaders. And the StartSoper itself is technologically considered very, very at a very superior level. That there is an expectation from the people, the Austrian public as well, who are very technologically advanced in adoption of whatever is happening, cutting edge. They expect the StartSoper to be ahead of the curve. So basically, here's the situation: the StartSoper needs to act digitally. There is no doubt, but without taking any financial risks. Now, this is the situation they are finding themselves in, and they cannot do anything that would compromise on the art form or their reputation, which means they have to act with zero financial risk or very little financial risk. But in acting, they run a risk of losing their reputation, because even a failure is not an option then. So this is the situation that the StartSoper is finding themselves in. So interesting, very interesting things I heard.
Yeah, Achal, I just have one question. I think a lot of us are talking about the streaming and the digital part from a very retrospective point of view, sitting in 2020 today. Yeah. When I'm thinking of 2012, like you asked us right at the beginning, and one of the mistakes I made while doing our present discussion is in 2012, doing digital art was something which was considered a complete waste of money. If one had to raise funds, one would be asked to look into ways where you can get actual audiences into the space rather than, OTT devices or OTT platforms and so on. If you think of it, even the idea of the OTT came in just in the last 2 years. So my question is, do you think that Maya would actually put so much of investment onto digital when at that point digital was not even one of the main players as such in this this streaming world as it is today?
Absolutely. And as you point out, OTT, I mean, in his consideration, Netflix or OTT was not even on the table. I mean, they were looking at smart TVs at that point in time. The smart TV, direct transmission onto smart TV, possible collaboration with Samsung, right? So that was the technology platform they were looking at, but let's make sense of it, okay? Let's make sense of how one would approach any business modeling. The whys, the hows, the what. Okay, so, what the StartSoper sets us up is to really wonder what business models are all about. And how does one go around making sense of them? How does one go around even building one for ourselves? And as I was beginning to say, it's not at all important of what StartSoper actually ended up doing. The what is not important. What is very important is the why and the how. Why you need a new business model, and how you go about making that decision. Because if you get comfortable with those two things, the what will come very easily to you. Okay, so let's see what we have covered in the last session so far. The business model itself plays a role in our business. Okay, in the last session, we left it at this point in time. We talked about a muse, which is really your target consumer. We talked about, and here we talked about the different, sort of orbits. We talked about the era of a brand, the exceptionalness, the rarity and authenticity, which is number 2. It flows into the value proposition, which is what your brand is and promising to deliver to. And the value market fit is how your value proposition is actually brought to the market, right? In what form? So when we looked at this, we then, I'm just revising this, yeah? We saw it, we captured it in this form, which is you have the era, which is, then translating into the value proposition, the value dimensions, which is for which customer type, what values are important. So we talked about cognitive aesthetic for the connoisseur. We talked about the experiential, sensorial as a primary driver for the amateur. And for the novice, we talked about the hedonistic experience and the symbolic projection. And how there is the importance of time over, delivering. There is a rite of passage in delivering this. We, as before we began this session, I think it was Arnab who was, one of you, or Vinil, one of you was talking about, how all three, you can't, how they attract each other, or rather how a novice is attracted to an amateur is attracted to a connoisseur, and they keep them together in a kind of a solar system. Which means that unless you have a connoisseur, you will not get an amateur. And unless you have connoisseurs and amateurs, you will not get novices as your customers, if you choose to get them. Knowing that the novice will pay the most, the connoisseur will appreciate it the most. So those are the choices that you will always have. Now, the question is, how do you translate this into a proposition? In what form will this proposition be experienced by the customers? You have an idea in your head, but how will the customers actually experience it? And they will experience it in these 5 dimensions, in these 5 ways, which means we have to first, once we have the value proposition, once we are clear who we want to sell to, and we've seen that it actually works for a certain kind of a consumer, what we want to do is create a holistic design, the value market fit design, which means you have to design your product, whether it's a live performance at the Staatsoper, or now a digital product, what the digital product will be like. What will it comprise? What will it mean, that product? That is the first question. As we said, we must maintain the sanctity of the performance itself, the art form itself, and yet bring it to a new consumer, new market, in a way that they will engage with it, they will enjoy it, and perhaps understand it even better, to make it more democratic. The second aspect is the mental availability. So you have a product design, you have a product architecture. The next point is, okay, how do we reach our consumer? mentally? How do we engage with our consumer? So, I don't like to use the words marketing or communication or distribution, because these things mean a far more. You've got to be available. You've got to win the mental availability of your audience. And there are multiple ways of doing that. Communication, advertising, etc., just one way. Keeping a track of all that is essential, but that whole design of how I am going to win my new consumers over. Number 3, the physical availability, which could be the choice of channels, which geographies I will go to, what kind of distribution arrangements will I make, what kind of partnerships will I get into to make the product physically available to the consumers. And the next thing is very important as well, the revenue model. How would I like my consumers to pay for it? Now coming back to the start questions, right? What would be the revenue model? Would it be free? If it is free, yes, it'll reach many people very easily. The acquisition of customers, new patrons to this art form will be many more. But will they really appreciate it? Will they stick? And more important, will it fulfill any of the financial obligations that Startstopper has towards itself? How much would they be? How would you be pricing? Would it be a single ticket? Would it be a subscription model? Would it be, like coming back to the physical availability, for example, the Met chose to go the cinema hall route. Would you choose that? Would you choose going with, for example, with Samsung and smart TVs? What would you choose? Cost model. In order to deliver your product, you've got to also pick the kind of resource and the cost model that that would best serve the value market with. Now, in this case of Startstopper, they're already, it's very clear they cannot take any financial risk, which means it has to be at the least cost model, and so forth. So the first thing that it means is that there is a whole design of the value market proposition in dimensions that the consumers can actually engage, can actually experience your brand, your product, your service, your concept, your performance. Now, once you've done that, you've got to bring it to the market. Now, you've got to give it a face, and that face is your brand. So all these things get packaged in form of a brand. So what is a brand? A brand is a symbol or an identity that represents and distinguishes one product, service, or concept from another in the mind of the consumer. I'll just stop. There are very clear 4 parts to this sentence. Number 1, that it is an identity and a symbol. Now, this is typically what we mean by a brand. Hey, it's a graphic or the logo, but that's only one part. It is there only in a way that it uniquely represents your product, your service, in a way that it represents your brand and it distinguishes it from the others. So in the mind of the people, they can refer and create a marker. But the most important, it's in the mind of the consumer, which means at the end of it, it must represent something. And what it represents, as we said, is this, which in turn is elaboration and the design of all of this. So you can see there is a continuation of whatever we've been discussing thus far. You get this bit wrong, which means you get your era wrong, you get your value market fit wrong. The rest of the things you'll be doing very well for poor results. So the first thing that anyone wants to really pay attention to is, have you got your value proposition dead on right? Have you defined your customers dead on right? And does it make sense to each other? If it does, then the rest of the things become easier, which means your creation of the design, you will know that there is a certain way that will clearly engage with that target audience. Okay, so a revenue model is very simple. The revenue model actually has nothing to do with the cost model. So for example, the revenue model of StartSoper for the regular business is very simple. You come, you buy a ticket, and you pay for the ticket. And 38 million is coming from the ticket sales. 50 million, more than 50 million is actually coming from public grants. So that's their revenue model from the state. And the rest, we have to depend on the ticket sales. Now, their ticket sales are limited to the number of seats that the StartSoper has, and they're already at 98%, right? So there is a limit to what their revenue model can provide unless they increase the prices. Now, we will see if they will be, if it's okay or not. So that's a revenue model, which means price into your capacity on the number of consumers, the number of users times the price. Now, when you go into, for example, live streaming, it could be like you do with Netflix, it could be a subscription model, for example. So again, the subscription, the whatever, $12, $13, $10 times the number of users, and that's your total revenue. The cost model, on the other hand, is what it takes, what resources it will take to deliver on your promise, and how do you create it in a way, structure it in a way that it becomes viable. Like, for example, the difference between Met and StartSoper is Stagione versus the repertory. You understand those things. So we'll see that in a little bit more in detail, but that's the difference between cost and revenue model. Is that better? So the important thing is that the brand value proposition, a brand is really about how the brand value proposition is experienced by your consumer. It probably means that a brand perception is different in every mind. So if there are 40 people here, you may pick any brand and you might actually have a different perception of that brand, each one of us. And why is that? Because it's a culmination of our own memory card, our own engagement with the brand. So every time we have any touch point with a brand, the memory card gets updated. So it's like millions and millions of memory cards. So there's brand perception is what you expect as a brand, but then there's a reality which may not match with the expectation. And the dream for any brand is to make this perception gap to be zero. Now, how do you do that? And that's the process I call branding. Branding, once again, I'd like to break down the conventional notions of branding being about advertising and communication. It's not at all that. It's really a process of making the perception gap to be zero, which means a process of consistently delivering on your value proposition across every touch point of a consumer experience journey. Now, this is not a glamorous job. This is an everyday hard task for any business you might be in, because the consumers are experiencing a brand in multiple ways across their entire experience journey. And we have to make sure that every touch point is consistent, because otherwise it would alter the data in their memory card. Why is it so complex? Because we have to deliver this across these different emotional drivers, and we've seen this: physical, rational, emotional, sensorial, symbolic. Here we are talking about the physical experiences. The physical experience, for example, in case of Start Soper, would be that, oh, you've got to actually, be in Vienna. You've got to get there. There is a whole physical experience of, of being there. But then there are rational factors, which are, can I afford it or not? So it may be very expensive, too expensive for me. It may be, for example, a very simple question of when we go digital with Start Soper. One of the big questions that Start Soper would have is, okay, if I'm streaming in the US, it'll be middle of the night or early in the morning. Who's going to watch it? Live streaming. So is that an option? How do I deliver it? How will people physically access it? Then there's the question of emotional. All the experience that, we've spoken about it, the emotional experience of a consumer. What the consumer is feeling when engaging with the brand, emotional level. Sensorial, we all know, it's what the experience is doing to our different senses. Very easily, you can relate to that in performing arts. And symbolic, as we've spoken about, is what it makes me feel about myself and me in the eyes of the others. The problem is that you got to maintain this at all stages of an engagement or a purchase or consumption. Before, which is zero moment of truth, during, which is the first moment of truth, and after, which is the second moment of truth. Which means that it's not just enough to maintain these dimensions of holistic experiences across these 5 dimensions during the time that the performance is happening. At the end of it, we want people to talk about you and talk in a fond way, in a way that they would attract more customers. And once again, it is not just the brand or the partners of the brands, whether it is for example, in case of, performing arts, you may be partnering, you may be performing at another theater. Now they become your partner, and the experience that people have with that theater itself would define the experience of them, and will have an impact on your brand. Similarly, the customers become responsible for their own experiences. To give an example, Guinness beer. Now, that's a beer which they particularly pride in a particular taste, which the makers believed came when the head was 2 inches thick. The head of the beer, the foam. Now, when it is being poured by a barman in a very busy pub, the last thing they bother about is, they have to quickly deliver. So they're not measuring it. They may be training, they may be doing whatever, but they're not measuring it. So how does Guinness overcome this problem? They solved it by putting the coasters there, which had a measuring thing, 2 inches, and just told the story that asking the customers to quickly just measure it and take it back to the bartender if it was not. So they became responsible for their own experience. And of course, then there are the curious audience who are neither the brand themselves, neither nor the partners or the customers, but they will have an opinion on the brand. And even that opinion, however that person has formed it, needs to be in line with what the brand wants. So it's a very, very complex process of managing the customer experience. Whatever you have in your control, make sure that it's done, even the littlest of the details, the littlest of the touch points, with the least important person in your organization is as good as you would want it to be. Now, this brings us to what is customer satisfaction and what delivers on the customer satisfaction. And this is what it means. If there are 7 stages of customer experience journey, each delivering 95% satisfaction, and this is a question to you, would they be what would be, which means if there are 7 stages of customer experience, you measure it at every stage and is delivering 95% satisfaction, you would tend to believe that I'm delivering 95% satisfaction to my customer. But actually, that is not true. Dissatisfaction is what people accumulate. They don't accumulate satisfaction. And this is not accumulated additively, but exponentially, which means that you're not just losing 5% and okay, at the end, I'm still delivering 95. No, you have actually made them dissatisfied to an extent of 27%, which is 5% times to the power of 7. Which means that by eroding on 5% of satisfaction at each of the 7 stages, at the end, you're only delivering 73% satisfaction. And this is not enough, because you want them to be your voice. Somebody who's at 73% satisfaction may come back to you, but is not going to recommend you. And very quickly on this point, this is the important thing. You must have all heard of Net Promoter Score. If not, I'll just quickly go through it very, very quickly. What we mean by a perfect customer experience is you deliver a very high NPS, which is a Net Promoter Score. And I'll just come in a minute what it means. But it just means that you are keeping the customers extremely satisfied, which result in referrals. And because your satisfaction level is high, you retain them and deliver a zero customer gap through a very careful delivery of the customer experience, which it becomes into a virtuous cycle. And this is what we mean by Net Promoter Score. In nutshell, you ask your consumers a very simple question. On a scale of 0 to 10, how likely are you to recommend, MSU is the placeholder, my brand to your friends, family, and business associates? Whatever scores you get, you're classifying them into 3 groups: detractors, passive, and promoters. And please know that only those who give you a score of 9 or 10 will promote you. Those giving a score of 6, 7, or 8 will neither promote nor detract. But anything less than that, you're in trouble. They will tell their friends, their family, their associates to stay away from you. And the NPS is very simply the percentage of promoters minus the percentage of detractors. So for example, if you have 20 detractors, 20 passive people, and 60 promoters, your NPS will be 40. So this is what we have covered so far, guys. Just a quick recap to make sense of what all we've done, because we've gone very quickly. So we've spoken about the value proposition and the value market fit, which is really what promise your brand brings to the consumer and to whom, and how it will be brought to the market will be determined by a holistic design. Then the question is how it will be actually experienced right through the journey by the customers. Now the question is, how do you actually go about delivering, putting all this together? And the vehicle that you have is a business model. A business model is a sum of all these elements coming together to make a sustainable business sense, like an equilibrium of the right kind of proposition, going to the right kind of consumer, delivering the right kind of experience at all stages, supported by the right kind of product design, the right kind of communication, different elements at the back end, which is, if you see, the whole process starts from 5 to 6 to 7 to 8, coming to 9, which is integrated capabilities. So you need then the right kind of capabilities, the processes, the technology, the optimization, the right kind of change management, which means the right kind of even thinking about it in order to deliver on everything that has been designed. You need the people who understand. So at Start Soper, one of the big challenges that you kept, and that was also brought out by the groups, when I was in the different rooms, I could hear the same conversation, and that was heartening to me, that you needed somebody to whom Dominic Meyer would not have to explain every morning what an opera is. They should be able to talk that language. Otherwise, they will not be able to deliver on the promise, which means whoever they needed to hire as the head of this project of digitalization, and whoever they work with as their partners, would have to themselves be opera connoisseurs or high degree of opera amateurs, and yet have the digital technology and business sense. A very hard combination. But without that, any project was doomed to fail. But you get that right person first and the right team first, you are assured that your reputational risks are mitigated. That person will know what elements of the true art form of opera need to are untouchable, non-negotiable. But somebody else will not even have an appreciation for that. For example, one of the very important things was the lighting. Now, it may sound very, very small matter, but lighting in a real performance is a very delicate matter. At many points in time, the stage becomes almost dark. How do you shoot that? How do you telecast live? It'll just be a black screen. And just one of the concerns. So you've got to be alive to the new channel need, digital needs. At the same time, you've got to be true to the opera form, as an example. So integrated capabilities, the right kind of people, the right kind of technology choice, the processes, optimization to service is very important. At the end, you need funding and resources to support that, which can come in various forms. It can come in form of some quick wins. Some of the quick wins, Dominique Meyer already sort of had instituted. For example, how he created more velocity of the resources by creating an additional stage, a second stage, which liberated the capacity to create more productions and to rehearse more. So it released the resources. For example, he negotiated 20% more of additional time for rehearsals with the orchestra. You can get external funding or external partners to fund you. In case of Staatsoper, that was Samsung. Asset reallocation, which means you can actually reconstruct your, reallocate your assets in order to deliver on a need today. For example, are you able to create co-productions? And that's what Meyer also did. Starting on the idea of co-productions for new productions in order to release some money for renewal of the existing productions. So this is an example of asset reallocation. Compliance, of course, is critical. It's the governance. It's compliance to what is sacrosanct, both from a perspective of the mandates, the legal mandates, but also the mandates imposed by the brand, by the patrons, by the stakeholders, and by the management. Transparency. And business plan, of course, at the end of it, what is a business plan? A business plan is nothing but like a clearly, like your flight path to the future. On, clearly saying, okay, where do I want to go? By what point in time? What resources am I going to need? And at any point in time, you are sort of missing out on maybe your revenue targets or your costs are going up. There'll be flags that there will be implications that you'll need to kind of deal with. So these are the different components of a business model, which, in other words, just picture this. So if the brand is the warrior that you are sending out in the market to fight for you, the business model is the chariot that the warrior is riding. So it all comes together in this very nice picture. It's color-coded to show the dark blue, which are strategic matters for transformation, strategic decisions. The dark green are those subjects which relate to execution, which bring efficiency. The lighter green is the capabilities that you would need to deliver on them, to support the execution. And lastly, the lighter blue are all the restructuring needs in form of resources. What's the objective at the end? Improve business results. Sales, profits, cash flows. And even if it is a non-profit organization, you still need to optimize on all these three things. Okay, what I suggest is, I think what I would suggest is that the group, sort of tries to make sense of whatever we've spoken about today. And maybe just go back to the three questions and see, would they like to structure anything differently, and talk about Start Super.